Hello there, and welcome back to my channel. I had to force myself to create this video because I took off 2 weeks from YouTube while my parents were here, and if you have ADHD, you know that getting back into the swing of things, building back that momentum and transitioning is really hard. I tend to be really all or nothing, so I was like, YouTube, and then I took a break and I'm like, ugh, YouTube? I don't even want to do this anymore. But I'm really challenging myself to show up. I also, on my Instagram talk a lot about the highs and lows that a lot of people with ADHD experience, and I'm in a bit of a low right now. So for me, that means I'm experiencing a lot less inspiration, motivation, I want to sleep more, I'm more tired. Really simple tasks feel a lot harder. It feels really similar to depression, but a bit different. So that's where I'm at right now. I gave myself some time to just kind of chill with no pressure. And then today I decided I am gonna make this video because it's important and I care about you all, and I hope that this video feels supportive for someone. So let's get into it, shall we? I want to talk about just like how I view ADHD, and in the 5 or so years that I've been diagnosed, this has changed over time, and it will probably change again. So if you're watching this in 2 years, know that I probably feel some different way, and that's okay. But currently, I think that ADHD is a neurobiological difference, and it's just a different neurotype, right? Like in the realm of neurodiversity, everyone has diverse brains, and ADHD is one of those forms of diversity. So I view it as a kind of neurodivergence. My brain is neurodivergent from the norm, and I view it somewhat neutrally, meaning I don't really view it as an amazing thing and I don't really view it as a horrible thing. I either view it neutrally or I view it as both. It can be really hard and it can be really amazing. There's a lot of discourse around, is ADHD a superpower? Some people really feel like it is, and some people hate that. Some people feel like it's this debilitating disability that gets in the way of them living their life. And so I want you to know that whatever you think about ADHD and whatever your lived experience is, that's valid, and you're allowed to think whatever you think and feel however you feel and approach this in whatever way feels right for you. I personally think that ADHD can be really disabling in the context of capitalism, in the context of our current world, and that outside of that, that there's nothing inherently wrong or broken or disordered about the way that our brains work. And it can be hard. So yeah, to me, it's really both. It's a strength and it's a challenge. And I'll kind of get into, for me, what those strengths look like and what those challenges look like. But overall, if I had to choose to change out my brain for a neurotypical one, I wouldn't. I feel grateful that I get to live within my brain and within my world, and there's a lot of different reasons for that. I got diagnosed when I was 25. So I got diagnosed as an adult, and I got diagnosed while I was in law school. The reason that I decided to go get support was not for ADHD, was because I was experiencing massive amounts of anxiety, feeling always behind my peers in law school, even though I was getting good grades. And I had started getting panic attacks. I was pulling out my hair, later trichotillomania, which is a really common co-occurring thing with ADHD, and just not feeling good. And that led my school counselor to ask me some questions about ADHD, which I'm so grateful for because it's so often missed. And from there, I went to a psychiatrist and got diagnosed. My process was a lot easier than what I hear a lot of people experience their process as. Mine was more just like questionnaire and a few different appointments with me, and then asking friends and family and health history and sort of all of those things. And then I eventually got diagnosed with inattentive ADHD, moderate to severe. I don't really like that, like the way of expressing that, but that's what it was, in case anyone was wondering. Getting diagnosed brought up so many different feelings and emotions and everything. On one hand, I felt so relieved. I felt everything in my past made so much more sense. Why I was struggling made so much more sense, and I got to really lean into, oh, maybe I'm not, wow, ADHD moment, I just got distracted. Maybe I'm not just lazy, or maybe I'm not just broken, or maybe I'm not just not trying hard enough. Like, this is actually something that I really struggle with, and here are the reasons why. And that felt really affirming and really validating. And then just like everything started clicking into place, and I went down this huge research hole, and all of a sudden I was like, wow, my whole life makes sense. And on the other hand, I was met with a lot of like, well, what does this mean for me? And what is ADHD? And is this something that's gonna hold me back? Or, you know, is this a disability? Is this a superpower? What the hell is this thing? Do I try meds? Do I not try meds? And just felt really confused, and also had questions of like, what would it have been like if I had known sooner? If you're in that process right now, I just want you to know that it's super normal wherever you're at in that, whether you're feeling relief, excitement, grief. You are totally normal, and it is totally okay. Over the years, I have been diagnosed with co-occurring things such as anxiety, depression, PMDD, and most recently I'm exploring OCD for myself. Now, to me, the labels don't feel as important as just understanding what's going on for myself so I can get the support that I deserve. A lot of people ask me questions about medication. In terms of overall medication, I view it very neutrally. So I'm not pro meds, I'm not against meds. I feel if they work for you, awesome. If they don't, that's cool too. If you want to use them, cool. If you don't, whatever. For me, I did try meds for my ADHD on 2 different occasions. Both of the times I tried Ritalin, and my experience was that it really helped in a lot of ways. I remember just feeling like, wow, this is what it feels like to not have like constant chatter in my brain. It felt a lot easier to listen to people with less effort. I was doing less like forgetful things like heating up coffee and forgetting it in the microwave. And I initially had kind of a boost of feeling like, oh, it's way easier to go for a walk, and I was keeping up with my bullet journal more and all of these things. And so I'm really grateful for meds that helped me get through the end of law school. And then when I retook them, when my sister died by suicide, to kind of help me get through that really, really challenging time in my life. At this point, I'm not on meds, and there's a few reasons for that. One is because stimulant medication tends to exacerbate my anxiety and make me a lot more obsessive, and just makes me feel like really tense and on edge. So the pros kind of stopped outweighing the cons for this season of life. Secondly, because I'm in a season of life where I can really create a life around the strengths of my brain. So that's where I'm at right now. I may go back to meds at some point, I may not. TBD, to be decided. Outside of the DSM and all the label stuff, like, how do I actually experience ADHD? From the outside, I would be categorized as someone with high achieving or high functioning ADHD. I do not like those labels because I think they pretty much just define how well you can function within capitalism and how much you can produce, and I think they don't account for someone's internal experience. So I am someone who, from the outside, you probably wouldn't know that I have ADHD. I don't really fall into a lot of the stereotypes. I can sit still for the most part. I can listen without interrupting well. I get good grades. I'm accomplished. I run a successful business, and for the most part, I keep my house organized. For the most part. And all of these other things that from the outside looking in you might not realize. But for me, internally and in my own little unmasked world, ADHD and my other mental health challenges are really, really challenging and do have a really big impact on my functioning. So I'm gonna kind of divide it into the challenges that I deal with and then the strengths that I see as part of my ADHD. As I mentioned before, I'm in one of those challenges right now. My ADHD tends to be pretty cyclical, so I'll be on a high for a while and then a lower low for another while. A lot of that is linked to hormones, which for folks who have a cycle and have ADHD, the way in which our hormones impact our neurotransmitters is really huge and can make a really big difference. So my ADHD feels really different depending on where I'm at in my cycle and what's kind of going on in that realm. Right now, the challenges that I experience are just feeling like it's really hard to initiate tasks. Everything feels really hard. Showering feels really hard, doing my dishes feels really hard, feeding myself feels really hard, making this video feels really hard, and yeah, just getting myself to do anything other than just like sit on the couch and not move feels really challenging. And it's not a matter of motivation or laziness, it's that my brain literally feels like it won't just like click into place and do the thing. And so I also get really bogged down in these times with decision fatigue, feeling that more executive function piece of like prioritizing, making decisions, figuring out how long things take, time management, and things in that realm. I experience ADHD as a difficulty or difference regulating my attention and my emotions. So to me, ADHD is not a lack of focus. Oftentimes it's too much focus, it's hyper focused. I get really zoomed in on something that I'm interested in and then cannot pull out of it. So that might look like getting really, really interested in learning about YouTube algorithm, for example. Kind of deep diving in that so deep that I forget to eat, I forget to pee, I get a headache, I feel dizzy, all of these things because I'm so zoomed in and struggle to transition that focus. That is a huge one for me. That is really, really hard and definitely impacts my well-being. I definitely experience my emotions very strongly in both ways. Again, experiencing those higher highs and those lower lows. That's not exclusive to ADHD, but many people with ADHD experience emotional dysregulation. And yeah, for me, like if I get upset about something, it's really, really hard to move on or let it go. But same if I get excited about something, I'm like all in it. So just like transitioning in between things is really, really, really challenging. And then I also deal with a lot of sensory sensitivities and sensory issues. So really sensitive to a lot of sounds, light, a lot of temperature stuff, if it's too hot or too cold, if my tag is bothering me, and you know, all of those different things. So those are some of the harder parts in which I experience with ADHD, and there's definitely way more than that. Those are just sort of the things that are coming to me right away. And there's also a lot of challenges that I don't necessarily think are like traits of ADHD, but that often come about as co-occurring things based on a lot of trauma from living in a world that is not designed for our brain. So I have a lot of chronic health issues, which I think is due to a lot of like my nervous system being really revved up and not really being able to like be in its window of tolerance very often. So kind of this chronic overwhelm, chronic stress that's led to, I believe, a lot of health issues. And there's also something called rejection sensitive dysphoria, which is really common amongst people with ADHD. There's a lot of debate about this, like if it's just complex PTSD, if it's something else. Labels aside, it's kind of a high sensitivity to rejection or criticism. I don't think it's inherent to ADHD necessarily. I think it comes about after living a life where you're sort of constantly criticized, even if it's not overtly. Then there are also a ton of strengths that I identify with ADHD. And a lot of that's just this broad sense of like, we need diversity in this world. We need neurodiversity. We need brains that work differently. We need those, you know, neurotypical people who can just kind of get shit done in a linear way, but we also need people who are highly attuned to stimuli, who are highly sensitive, who are viewing the world in a really non-linear, non-rule-based way, and we are needed in this world. And I'm so glad that I fall within this kind of neurodivergent realm, because I think we are so important. to the survival of our society and just to having an interesting place to live. Some of the specific strengths I see within myself: I am highly creative, and I can come up with like a million ideas in like 2 seconds. I feel like I could like get paid to be someone who creates ideas for businesses because I have so many. So a lot of out of the box thinking. I connect a lot of dots that other people don't connect. I often see things in a way that people don't see things, and that's really fun. It's really fun to just kind of see the world through a different lens. In some ways, to me, it feels similar to my queerness. It's like just seeing the world in a way that's so different from the norm, and in a way that there's not these like rules that you start with. You really get to kind of create these rules and these ways of being from scratch. Feels really exciting. I definitely feel like I work well under pressure, well in a crisis. You know, it's way harder for me to go grocery shopping than it would be if someone called me and they were having an emergency and I needed to get there in this like short but like high energy type of way. I definitely thrive in those situations, and I find myself really stepping up in emergencies and in crisis situations and in things that require like short but intense bouts of focus in ways that are really powerful. So that's a strength. I'm just looking down because I wrote some notes. I feel like I am just constantly curious. Like a lot of ADHDers are always like, why? And that's something my teachers would always say, like, why do you always ask why? Like, stop asking why about everything. But I always want to know things and to learn things, and I just have a great capacity for wanting to understand things, and I think that's really driven by having an interest-based nervous system. So ADHDers are really interest-based, whereas a lot of non-ADHDers or neurotypical people are more based on like what's important or priority. ADHDers are like, what's interesting? What am I passionate about? And that can be really hard because it can lead to a lot of hobby jumping, job jumping, lack of identity, because it's like 1 minute you're identifying so strongly with this thing, and then the next minute you're identifying so strongly with this thing. But I love that my brain forces me to follow my interests and follow my passions, and doesn't allow me to stay in things if I lose interest or passion about it. And that's something that I've just come to accept, and just to come to really just feel like, well, man, this life is short, so sure, like, let's follow the things that do light me up while they light me up, and if they stop lighting me up, then so be it. From what I can see, so many ADHDers have really high levels of compassion and high levels of empathy, which is something I highly resonate with. I am a risk taker, so some impulsive behaviors that I've done are start my ADHD business. I've moved across the country and started dance classes, and these things that I do just based on this like internal like impulse to do it. And I love that about myself. Some of these risks or impulsive behaviors that I've made have led to some of the best things in my life. And then there's so many more things, but the last thing that really comes up for me is in the same way that I feel lows really low, and I feel rejection really intensely, or I feel, you know, if I see an animal hurt, I feel it so deeply. It like feels like my heart is getting ripped out of my chest. I also experience things that are exciting, happy, positive, beautiful with so much intensity that I don't think a lot of other people do. So I experience music at this level and art at like this level of my soul that just feels so intense, and I experience love so intensely and notice colors and landscapes and flowers and all of these things. I get to just like, I'm looking through this lens that just like magnifies everything, where things are like more colorful, more beautiful, more exciting, and I wouldn't trade that for not having to experience low lows. I'm sure I'm missing a million things, but I'm gonna move into how do I deal with ADHD? How do I cope with ADHD? And there's a lot of moving pieces to that, and it's gonna be really different for everyone. The first thing that I will say that has been life-changing is really just leaning into self-acceptance, self-compassion, and really working through the shame and beliefs that I have about ADHD and about myself. So I've done so much work on accepting myself, relearning what it means to have a neurodivergent brain, of unlearning a lot of ableism, of really finding compassion for myself when I am in dips or when I am struggling, and for really, really embracing not being broken, being whole, that I'm not disordered, that there's nothing wrong with me. This is just the way that my brain works, and sometimes that's going to be great and sometimes that's going to be really hard, and I will love myself and care for myself through it. Next, which has been really helpful in number one, is finding ADHD community. Surrounding yourself by people who get it, who understand without you having to explain, who speak a very similar ADHD kind of language, who you don't have to explain why it's so hard to unload the dishwasher to, or how having to wait 3 hours before your next appointment sends you into a meltdown, or whatever the case may be, is so healing, because you start seeing all of the beauty and wonderfulness of these other people, and it starts getting reflected backward to you. And that has been probably the most healing thing for me in this journey. And I run a community called the Collective Empowerment Group, which is a monthly membership that is for folks with ADHD, and it's really, really special. So if you're looking for a community, definitely check that out. I'll link it below. And if not, whatever ways you can find community, definitely go for it. Next, designing a life around my brain. So rather than going, okay, how am I going to fit myself into this neurotypical mold, into these neurotypical rules? It's like, okay, where are my strengths? Where are my challenges? What do I need to be successful and happy? And how can I design my life around that? Of course, this isn't always going to be possible. There's different levels of privilege involved in this. But for me, that has really looked like getting really clear on what my values are, what's important to me, and how my brain works, and what I need in order to really live a value-driven life. So I could create a whole video on this, and if you want me to, I will. But one of the ways that I've done this is by engaging in entrepreneurship. So I create my own schedule. I can kind of switch things up as I want. I can try new ideas, and it kind of has this like ongoing dopamine, and I get to decide what time I wake up. And I never start work before 10 because my brain doesn't wake up by then. And I really get to set my schedule up with the breaks that I want and everything that's going to work best for my brain. That doesn't mean entrepreneurship is easy, because it's not, but it is definitely the thing that makes the most intuitive sense to my brain and allows me to be successful. I also have moved, so I live kind of in the woods, and where the sensory environment is really slow and peaceful and quiet, and that really allows my nervous system to be calm and to recharge in the way that I need to. Other things that I've done to kind of set myself up, and again, I know this isn't always possible, I'm just giving examples. I live in central to Northern California in Santa Cruz area, and the weather here is just great for my mental health. Like, really foggy weather makes me brain foggy, and so here it's like pretty much always sunny and not too hot or not too cold, and that's really, really good on a sensory and mood level. For me, I set myself up where I have ample alone time, because I know I need that to recharge. If I have something that I know is going to be a lot of output of energy, I try to have some time before and after that to like prepare and then recharge. I really set myself up with a lot of hobbies and a lot of things that I know create dopamine and sort of get my brain activated and excited and in a good place. And then I have relationships in my life that allow me to just be me, allow me to cancel plans if I need to cancel plans, or rearrange plans if I need to rearrange plans, or help work with me to find plans that feel more accessible or doable for me, and people who appreciate my quirks and who really value what I have to offer rather than focusing on my challenges. So those are just some ways in which I've really set myself up to, have a life that really feels like it utilizes the things that I'm naturally good at. And of course, again, like I said, there's always going to be things that are really hard, and when those things happen, I need extra support or different coping tools to kind of bring in. So some of those more practical things for me really look like getting a lot of support. So I have a therapist, I have a coach, I have an ADHD community, and doing the things that I know really help my brain. So I really try to get adequate sleep. For me, that's like 8 or 9 hours. I try to eat in a way that makes my body feel good without being too obsessive about it. And I try to exercise regularly, get out of the house, move, go for walks, and try different like supplements and different things. And when I've needed meds in the past, then I've brought meds in. I also utilize a lot of things like body doubling or co-working, which is what we do often in my membership, calling a friend, verbal processing something if I need help, and then finding other things like organizational tools like bullet journaling that feel really supportive and helpful for me. Along the realms of acceptance and compassion, I think one of the biggest parts of that has been like just knowing that I kind of live this cyclical up and down sort of life where I'm gonna feel really good at times and I'm not gonna feel so good at times. And so while I am with my doctor working on more of this hormonal piece that I think is a huge part of that, I've also really worked on just sort of knowing that's what happens, anticipating it, accepting it when it happens, and being really gentle and kind to myself, and just knowing that my brain isn't like everyone else. It's not going to just be on at this steady level all the time. I'm not a steady person, and I can just make that work. And when I'm on, I'm on, and when I'm off, I try to just let myself be off to the extent that I can. That's not always perfect, right? Sometimes I beat myself up or get stressed or anxious or whatever the case may be. It's a huge work in progress, but really just leaning into like, how can I be more compassionate to myself? What would I say to a friend who is going through this? What am I needing is really, really powerful. I hope that answers some of your questions and helps give you a little sneak peek into my journey with ADHD, where I've been and where I'm at now. Here on YouTube, I've created my videos that are a little bit more general, mental health and lifestyle, but I do run an entire business called Authentically ADHD that's just centered around ADHD. So you can find me on my Instagram, you can join my community, or just reach out if you're wanting any other types of coaching or just support or to chat. I'm also really curious to hear, if you're here listening to this video, if you would like some of my other videos to be more ADHD specific. So rather than just like a day in the life type of video, would you like me to show you what like my ADHD day in the life looks like, or things of that nature? If that would be appealing to you, let me know, and let me know any other questions you have. I am out of breath from talking so much. But yeah, I upload videos weekly with the rare exception. So I look forward to hearing from you, and I will see you in my next video. Thank you so much for watching and hearing my story.